we started to make this clarification that when we're talking about this process of curriculum development, it is not about adding something or mandating something to our plate. Because I think when I hear the frustrations, the feedback from the PLCs or individual principals when I talk to them about what their concern is with their school, almost always the language comes up of, well, this is one more thing I just don't have time for. Maybe we'll look at Common Core, down the road in a couple years when I'm not in WASC or when I'm not in, whatever that might be. And when we're having that response, we're losing sight of what the real picture is, or the bigger picture is. And it's the idea that what we're talking about here is evaluating the culture that's in our school right now. And potentially, for most of us, really reflecting on how we can refine and change that culture. Because our goal is going to be, how can we achieve this culture of excellence in our building? Because if we can work toward this culture of excellence, it doesn't matter what comes down the pipeline. All of it fits into this larger picture. Because, as people said, education is constantly going to have new research that needs to inform our practice. There are going to be new sets of standards out there as research informs them. It's not just ELA and Common Core. There's going to be, math and Common Core, the next generation science, the religion standards. That cycle isn't going to stop necessarily. And so we can't get caught up in the specifics necessarily of what that thing is. We need to take a step back and say, what culture have we established within our school to focus on excellence? So just as a refresher from last time, we talked about the 3 big ideas. And I want to make sure we can fit this process into them. That first idea was a relentless focus on student learning. And there were 4 main questions that you need to be able to answer to actually put this into practice. Because of course we would all say we have a relentless focus on student learning, we're passionate about education in our schools, but what does that actually look like in our building? And the very first thing that it looks like is being able to answer the question, what do we want our students to learn? The ability to answer that means that's where the idea of looking at standards came from. Standards answer the question, what do we want our students to learn? Because they give the specific content, the specific skills in every single grade. And while standards have been out there for a long time, if we're really going to be able to say that we can answer this question not in isolation as a grade, but start thinking of my child's whole journey, we need to analyze them in depth. And that's what we've been modeling with the Common Core, is how to take a step back and analyze those standards so we can answer that question, what do we want our students to learn? The next thing, though, is the ability to say, so how do we know if they've learned it? It's the assessment piece. This is also built into this process when we're talking about the school-wide assessments and how do we start having that conversation. And looking at that not only on a summative level, but then when we do the unit framework, start looking at that assessment piece on a formative level. So again, this process is just helping us have a framework to be able to answer these bigger questions that become a part of our school culture. Then, once that's in place, then we can start getting even deeper. Once we have the foundation in place, then we can start saying, well, what processes do we have if they don't learn it? What processes do we have if they actually already know it and we haven't taught it yet? Because now I can't go pull out that unit the way I thought I could. So we're not maybe ready to go there yet, but we have to lay the foundation first, so eventually that can be the next thing we look at to develop our culture. So that's the first big idea. The second big idea, of course, is then to do this well, we must be collaborative. We need a collaborative culture and a collective effort to support student and adult learning, so ours as well. So again, we go back to this process that we're talking about with curriculum development and using Common Core ELA to do that, is helping us to start having collaborative discussions in our building in a very low-risk setting. Because high-risk setting is when we start having to actually look at data and do something about it, right? Second the data goes up, I have excuses for why that happened. Oh, that kid, that was, because we get so personal. It's hard to jump into that, and that's often what we've done at a school when we look at ITBS data or the benchmark data, and then we wonder why the conversation doesn't go anywhere because no one wants to feel comfortable talking. This process of first analyzing standards and looking at vertical progression and looking at unpacking allows us to start having collaborative discussions in a low-risk setting. So then, when we get to that third big idea that says a results orientation, in other words, analyzing data informs everything. And our faculty meetings are not about designing curriculum anymore. We already know what students are learning. Now it's all about using data to analyze practices and refine and move forward. And that becomes the culture we want to strive for. So that every faculty meeting is bringing formative data and talking about what's working, what's not, how will we troubleshoot to help this child. It's a total shift in culture in our building. But we can't get there until we first lay this foundation. And that's what the curriculum development process is all about. It's laying the foundation, starting to answer the what will they learn and how will we know if they have, starting to build those collaborative, collegial relationships and conversations first in a low-risk environment before we're ready to jump into something that feels potentially more high risk. But by the time we get there, we have the trust in place to be able to do that, to know that we are all on the same page to help every child, that it's not about evaluating us, it's about looking at what can we tweak to help the child. So that's the bigger picture that we want to frame all of this into. Take a minute to just process with the people around you. Where do you feel you are kind of on the journey toward this culture of excellence within your own building? It may be the most foundational level where, we're actually just looking at standards for the first time to figure out what student learning. It may be, we have some of these other pieces. We actually collaborate really well in grade level teams, but try to put us together as a whole faculty and not so great, Or my primary are awesome. Where are you? Just think about where you're at in the journey, because that's how you make this process relevant to your school. Because you think about where you're at in the journey, and then how can this process help move you forward toward this picture. Okay, take a minute. We're at that point, anytime when you bring, new information to people, there's kind of hills and valleys to the momentum of how a change, happens. And I think, people started off kind of slow, and then we were really excited about the feedback, and they were starting to have collaborative discussions, and then you go into the natural kind of lull or resistance or pushback, and it's at that point where you're really at a tipping point of, is just going to fizzle away and never impact our students, or can this move somewhere and potentially help shape the culture within our schools, so that at the end of the day, it isn't about us as leaders, it's about a culture that can constantly sustain itself in the school. And regardless of what new information will come, it always is focused on relentless focus of student learning, use data to inform instruction, always collaborating, so that goes beyond us. So my question to you is, thinking about where your PLC and your principals are kind of with this right now, how do we help refocus? How do we help have the conversation to get over this tipping point? So that we can lead to that benefit to support our teachers and that benefit to support our students as they move forward. How can we help that happen? What conversations can we have within our PLCs to support that with each of the principals?